Thanks for all coming out tonight. Like he said, this will be part 2 on my talk about GraphQL. This is the front end one, so we're going to call it full stack without the Flak. Tonight, I'm going to give you a little bit on my background. Michael already gave you a good intro on who I am, but I'm going to do it anyways because I already made the slides. I wasn't ready for Michael to do that. So yeah, we'll talk about that. We'll get into the history and purpose of GraphQL. So if you did miss part 1 of this talk, we'll kind of just explain briefly at a higher level kind of what makes GraphQL cool and what makes it different than other server-side sort of thought processes. And then we'll talk about Apollo versus Relay. Those are kind of the 2 major front-end frameworks that people use with GraphQL and maybe why you would choose one versus the other. Then we'll dive into our demo and do some Q&A. Cool. So let's talk about me for a second. So I spent a lot of my early 20s playing music, got to tour around the country. I played in a hip-hop group and got to open for like Macklemore and Salt and Peppa and stuff. That was a lot of fun. And that led me to a transition into radio. In town, I was on air with KS 107.5, hanging out with Ice Cube all the time, and 104.3 The Fan. And I also had a national radio show, and that was cool. And part of that radio experience was helping to launch Comedy 103.1 here in town, which led me to working for Sexpot Comedy, which is a local comedy podcast network and production company. And through all 3 of those phases, from music to radio to comedy, I always ended up being the kind of go-to tech guy, whether that was like, you know, editing blog posts or uploading podcasts for stations. I was just that guy that's like, Isaac understands computers, and I do. So it worked out well, and it got me interested in coding, and eventually that led me to Galvanize. As Michael said, about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, I was in the G30 cohort at Galvanize, and while I was there, got to take part in the Denver Broncos Tackle STEM Hackathon, sponsored by SendGrid and Full Contact, and my team actually won Best Sports Hack, which was really cool. Got to have our picture taken with Russell Okung, who is no longer a Bronco, so that was fun. Makes it look really legit. And then after that, I did become the full stack resident for G43. It was a really cool experience being able to help lesson plan, help build out parts of the curriculum, and help students with the process of going from whatever career they were in before to being a developer. And it was nice to be able to go through the program a second time, now on the teaching side, to really cement my JavaScript skills. At the end of that, I got an offer from Vertafore, who you may have gotten hit up on LinkedIn by one of our recruiters. They're pretty relentless. But if you don't know about us, we're SaaS for the insurance industry. We have 40-some-odd products. We've been around since 1969, going back to like the punch card computing days. And now we host over 1.6 billion files in the cloud and had over 85 million real-time transactions annually. So definitely big data problems all the time, and stuff like GraphQL can definitely help with that. The stack that we use, so Java and C# on the back end. Teams use one or the other. I'm on a C#.NET team. Oracle, SQL, and then tons of non-relational databases, a lot of Mongo and that going around. And then, like, my team uses Angular on the front end, but there's also Angular 2 and 4, React, a little bit of Vue even, and ASP.NET. And we're hiring, so if that sounds cool to you, let me know, and we can chat afterwards. I can point you in the right direction and everything. Yeah, that's that. I think I did Vertafore proud with that. That's enough about me. Yeah, that is Anders Holmvik. And not the last GIF tonight. There's going to be a few. But yeah, let's talk about GraphQL. So first, quick disclaimer. I am not a lawyer. So if you came in with a bunch of questions about the whole patent situation with the Facebook stack, I will say, I have opinions. So I'm down to answer questions, but my legal skills basically amount to bird law. So take what I say with a grain of salt. You should definitely have someone who is an actual attorney look over that sort of stuff. But if you want to talk about that, it's definitely in the news a lot right now. So I'm down to do it. I'm not going to talk about it too much in the talk, but we can go into it during the Q&A. So what is GraphQL? It's a query language designed for API development. It was created by Facebook, as I mentioned before, in 2012 just to use internally, and eventually they released it to the public. And it really aims to solve the problem of having to make multiple requests in order to render a component with its data or an entire page. And it's getting used beyond just Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, Pinterest. I don't have their logo up here, Mozilla, tons of big companies, so it does scale well. But it also works on smaller projects. So no matter what size your company is, you can probably integrate GraphQL somehow. So the big idea behind GraphQL and where it gets its name as graph query language is that it allows you to traverse your data as if it was a graph. So instead of thinking of it maybe more in sort of RESTful terms where it's I have this table with this one resource and then I'm going to make multiple calls to multiple tables in order to get my data, now with GraphQL, your client side can make one request to one endpoint and get all the data that you need. You don't need to worry about different methods or anything like that. It's all just right there. It also allows you to shape what the response data is going to look like in your request. You'll see some of that tonight in our demo. And so beyond just being able to know that it's always one endpoint and just one request getting your data, you can also ensure that you have no overfetching of data because you're only getting back the fields that you're actually going to use, and that you don't have to do as much data manipulation after the response. You'll see tonight I'm doing everything other than maybe like a map on a few things just to iterate over stuff and render a list. Like I'm not manipulating any of the data that we'll get back from our server. And that means GraphQL apps are more performant, especially on mobile devices, because now you have one request response cycle, and that's it. So with all of that, when you start talking about REST, or start talking about GraphQL, a lot of people ask, could it replace REST? Because there's a lot of things about GraphQL that kind of goes against REST methodology. And to that I say, no. Now, don't get me wrong. So if you're starting a new project, you could definitely just build out your entire server with GraphQL. It can be a standalone thing. But if you already have a REST backend, you could use GraphQL alongside those endpoints or as a middleman to go fetch from those endpoints so that your front end is still only concerned with making one request to one endpoint, but now GraphQL is doing all the heavy lifting of actually talking to all the different endpoints and getting that data back. And it does work with both relational and non-relational databases. I have yet to find some database that is not supported by GraphQL. And similarly, it's pretty much language agnostic. We'll be doing JavaScript tonight because it is the Node.js meetup, but you could do GraphQL with Python, Ruby, Go, C#, C, and C++, tons of different libraries for it. So if we take a look here real quick at the GraphQL ecosystem and how a little bit of this magic is working at a higher level. So we have our front end, and the idea of making requests and getting back data, that's still there at a high level. But now we break it down into either it's going to be a query or a mutation. A query is just fetching data. Mutation, right there in the name, we're actually going to change the data somehow, whether it's going to be basically your post, put, delete sort of methods. And those feed into resolvers, which tell GraphQL how to access all the types and the subtypes that relate to those types. And so you can get it all back in just one request. So moving into relay versus Apollo, those are going to be the two that you see the most about if you're building out a GraphQL front end. So relay is really intended for use with React and React Native, and the main reason for that, spoiler alert, made by Facebook. So they definitely want you to drink their Kool-Aid with everything. And also because of that, only sort of open source. We were talking earlier, it's like, you can make a pull request, but if you don't have a Facebook employee ID badge, don't hold your breath on having it actually merged into the code base anytime soon, like sort of open source. Whereas Apollo Client is a lot more flexible. You can use it with React and React Native, but also Angular or Java and Swift if you're trying to do Android or iOS apps. And it was made by the people behind Meteor, and it's getting used by Mozilla, Credit Karma, and Coursera. So it's getting used all over the place. You can find tons of resources on it. It's definitely not some small thing, but it is truly open source. They're very responsive on their GitHub, and you can open up issues, submit pull requests, and become a contributor of it. So that being said, that's why we're using that tonight in Petstagram. My whole idea for this app is that why do I want to look at pictures of other people's food or what they're doing at some concert? I'm really on Instagram for the pet photos. So let's just streamline that process, get right into it, and make Petstagram. Taking a look at the ERD of kind of what's happening in the back end. We're not going to look at any of the back end code tonight, but basically we have three major types that GraphQL knows about: users, pets, and images. And then some different ways that we relate all that data. So users can be friends with each other just to be able to find pets more easily. It's not about connecting with people, it is about connecting with cute animals. So we've got a lot more ways for users and pets to relate to each other, both with followers and owners. And then pets and images relate to each other with pet images. Because users can have profile images, but I'm not about that life of letting them send out a bunch of images that are not pets. So they get one, and if they want to change it, that's fine, but they only get one. Tonight, for Petstagram, we will be using, shocker, GraphQL, React, and Apollo. For some quick, simple styling stuff, I definitely did not angle this towards like a CSS talk. So we're using Bootstrap and Font Awesome just to kind of get things on the page, but this is not what I would release to the world as like a fully styled app at this point, but it's fine, it works. And then we're gonna use React Router as well, just to do some routing within our app. So that being said, let's do this. Let me get set up here real quick. All right, cool. I'm just gonna quit Slack real quick because I see 4 people up front that could start sending me Slack messages, and I don't really, I don't know, force quit that. Come on, Apple. All right, great, fantastic, sweet. Look at this great app, guys. Welcome to Petstagram. That's what we're working with right now. It's gonna get much better. So right now, if we take a look, and actually I'm just gonna make sure before we dive into it that all of my settings here in my terminal and in Atom are working properly. So is that big enough for people to see what's happening there? Yeah, cool. If I switch over to Atom, let's look at our front end. Yeah. Cool. All right, sweet. So right now, the current state of the app is essentially just create React app. If you've done React at all, real easy CLI tool just to get kind of the bare bones set up. The one thing I have changed is our favicon, because I'm like, I know where we're going. We're gonna be about pets. This is not the React logo anymore. And I changed the title to Welcome to Petstagram instead of React. But outside of that, it's all very basic stuff. It's just kind of what comes out of the box with Create React App. So now let's take a look at setting up actually our project with Apollo. Cool. So we'll see here, app.js hasn't really changed at all yet. The big changes are gonna come in from index.js. So instead of just having an app component, now we're actually gonna wrap it with Apollo provider. And there's some interesting setup things that happen as we get this going here. So from React Apollo, we're gonna bring in the Apollo provider, a network interface, and Apollo client. So the network interface, the first thing that we set up, it's really one of those sort of black magic code things where you just give it an endpoint, and from there, it knows how GraphQL works. So you don't have to set up any sort of methods or some function that's like, cool, this will fire HTTP get this resource, dot then, blah, blah, blah. It's like, nope, just this is the endpoint, and that's all we need to know about it. And then we instantiate a new Apollo client with the network interface, just to let React know that we will be using Apollo and some of the Apollo syntax and some of our things tonight. And then we wrap it all with Apollo provider. So yeah, nothing too crazy there. Again, our app looks very much the same still. I've got old setup there. We'll make sure we go truly to the home page. Great. So let's actually look at now setting up our first GraphQL and Apollo component. Oh, gotta actually, there we go. That'll figure it out. Sweet. So now we've got 2 different things happening. I've added 2 components. So splash page first is a pretty standard React component here. I do have our first actual React Apollo higher order component in here, and we'll take a look at that next. But other than that, it's stuff that you've seen in React before. We're just exporting the component with the router because now in app.js, we're just gonna be concerned about creating a switch for our router. But if we want to look at our first GraphQL component, I'm going to slide down here to look at our GraphQL query. So in here, we're going to use a resource from React Apollo. Right now, we've got a GraphQL container and GQL tag. So GQL tag, what it does is allows you to write as a string a GraphQL query, and it'll interpret everything and actually format that into your request, so you don't have to worry about putting in all the like %20s and all of that into the actual query. You could copy and paste this into Graphical, which is GraphQL's like dev tool for just testing out your queries, and it would work right away. So it's kind of nice to be able to look at the syntax here and your syntax in other areas in your backend and see that it's very much the same thing. And then down here, so we've declared this query. We're going to use the GraphQL container to create a higher order component So we point it to the query itself, and in this case, I'm going to give it a name. I don't have to give it a name, but otherwise everything is going to be attached to my props as data, and so it's just better practice to give it a name so that you know exactly which request, when you have multiple queries or multiple mutations, what data you're looking for. And then we'll make it a higher order component using splash page images. So if we want to see, like from up here, I'm not having to call really anything too much about GraphQL once I get into the component. In here I have a couple extra things that are nice, that every GraphQL query is going to have a loading and an error property attached to it, just so that we can know, is it still loading or did it error out? So we can have these right at the top just to make sure, oh, if it's still loading for whatever reason they're on a slow connection, we can display this. I would imagine you probably want to do something slightly more graceful than this, but you know, loading, it works. And then error down here. But then once we actually have access to our data, in here, all I'm doing is just getting the pet profile image off of my pet object here, because as much as I requested just the profile image off of it, there is some other metadata, so I'm just going to strip it down to just the profile image properties. And then I'm going to grab the last 6 in that array just to display on our home page. So if we switch back over to our browser now, hey, we got pets. It's not, you know, the sexiest homepage in the world, but it's pets. We got a button now. It doesn't do anything yet, but we're going to make it do something in the next step. So anything, since that was our first kind of look at a GraphQL component and using React Apollo to get all this working. Any questions just about the kind of upfront syntax? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I'm giving it an like it's going to get an ID back for each image to use in the cache, and that's a great thing to bring up, because Apollo does have its own kind of baked in. It's sort of its own version of the Redux store, and you can check against that cache. And we'll actually later on tell it specifically to use both the cache and the network. So keep stored data in the cache, but if there's something that's updated in the network, update on our props. Yeah, totally. So instead of being data, now it is my all pet profile images query, which is a mouthful. Maybe not saving as much as data, but it's nice when you've got multiple things coming through to be able to say, we'll see later on that we'll have a query and a mutation together, or multiple queries potentially in a component. And so it's nice to be able to say, specifically, we're talking about the profile images query. And so if I was wanting to get maybe user info on this front page as well, I might call it like all users query or something, so that I could specifically speak to those props. Exactly. Yeah. The query is just bound to the component as a higher order component using the GraphQL container. But yeah, it's truly that the data gets cached, not the query itself. Cool. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Does it look for the data in the cache before it sends off the query? So once we get into actually saying cache and network only, so like right now, I want to say by default it does just look at the cache first unless you force it to update the query. We will later tell it to like go fetch stuff from the query, compare it to the cache, and then if there's updated info, update the cache in those things. But yeah, you can tell it specifically just go with cache data, just go with network data. Just depends on what you need to do for that specific component. Yeah, good questions. Yes. Yeah. So I said I wasn't going to go into the back-end code, but we can look at the model real quick. So she asked if the model is just called pets, and it is. So I have a pet type in here. Oh boy, I've got so many things open. But yeah, so my pet type right here, it's literally just named pet. Michael gave me the note, repeat the question. I do need to do that better. So I'm going to try that going forward. Yeah, so and I also have like user and image types in here, but it knows, so the query itself, if we want to look at our root query, it's formatted where this query right now, so this is the pets query that can grab any property that belongs to pets. Later, for the pet profile, we'll use the single pet query, but that's why in my front end, I just use pets as the query itself. It's just right there. Not at all. No. Yeah, it could be anything. It's just, yeah, so it really just depends what makes sense to you if you want those to match, or if you want to be more explicit about certain, because you could break things up. Say you have a table that contains 10 columns, and you know that you have a certain query that brings back 3 of those columns and another one that brings back the other 7 of those columns. You could call those different things so that you could just on the fly just do those if you wanted. Right now I just have everything that could belong to a pet. That's going to happen in the pet or the pets query. Cool? Word. So since we've got this login or register, let's do like the most basic version of auth on our front end using GraphQL. So now if we go back in here, now I've got an auth form that we're going to use. And in here, I've actually got 2 different mutations set up here. So first is our register user mutation. If we're registering as a user for the first time, I'm going to actually fire 2 mutations. So GraphQL, if it's a query, will run everything in parallel. So it'll fire off everything at once and just wait for all the data to come back. But mutations do run serially. So I can actually add my new user before then logging in as that user with their email and password. I just put both those mutations in one kind of parent mutation. And then for logging in is just going to be the same as the bottom down here as it was above, where it just takes an email password, and our backend is set up to send us back a token and a user ID. And if they give bad credentials, right now the backend just sends back an ID of -1 and an empty string token. So we can use that later on to do a little bit of protected stuff. I'm not auth protecting routes on the back end or anything like that. This is truly just so that we can maybe have a little bit of a way to say, oh, you're looking at this user and you are that user, or you're friends with that user, or you're looking at this pet and you own this pet, or you follow this pet, because there might be some different functionality baked into that. And then the other big thing with this, since we've got 2 mutations now, I'm going to use from React Apollo Compose. So Compose allows us to fire multiple mutations or queries in one. Essentially, I mean, we've got 2 sub GraphQL containers, but it's going to make one big GraphQL container and bind that to our auth form still in a higher order component. And then everything else from there is again, mostly pretty standard React stuff of like, we've got a state for the form. I do have this extra this extra state property called login, which is just, we're letting users now toggle between, do they want to register or do they want to log in, all that sort of stuff. But other than that, we just set state on each one of the input fields, and then we do also have a button that allows people to toggle whether they're logging in or registering. So if we want to look at that form real quick, and actually let me just make sure that from the last time I logged in, I've got, let's clear that out. I'm not logged in anymore. Cool. Oops. Switch my profile. Let's just go back to the home page. Cool. So right now, we could log in as Kendrick Lamar, or we could create a new user. In this case, I know Kendrick's password, so let's log in as Kendrick. That's kind of cool. Sweet. And now on my splash page, I do have one conditional set up to be able to take a look at whether or not we've got a user ID and a token, and if we do have a token, they can actually just go straight to their profile as opposed to seeing the login or register button. But beyond that, it's all still kind of standard React stuff that way with some of these conditionals built into your component template. And so now with that being said, since I've got this profile thing, right now if I go there, nothing's going to happen. So let's make something happen with that. Sweet. So now going into our user profile, we've got, once again, now just one query for now set within our GraphQL container. This query, this time I'm going to get a lot more off of my user object. So I want their ID, their name, and then each of their friends, which will be an array of user objects. I want for those friends, ID, name, the profile image of those friends, as well as and the ID and URL within that profile image, what pets they own, what pets they follow, and then that user's profile image itself. And now we're doing one more thing. Beyond just passing a name in our GraphQL container, we're also going to use options in here. And so this is just a way, because my GraphQL query requires an ID, I'm just going to grab that right out of the URL using props match params ID as just kind of a standard thing to grab it from there. I could grab it from if I wanted to like actually hit the database or something instead. I could do it that way as well, but this is just a lot cleaner with that routing. So in here, if we go above, we're grabbing the user ID out of session storage, and we're also going to we're grabbing the user ID out of the actual URL, but we're going to see who's looking at this page via session storage, so that if you're looking at your own profile or someone who's your friend potentially, you won't have the option to send a friend request. If we don't have a viewer ID or it's -1, which means they had a failed login, we're just going to redirect them back to the home page. And then beyond that, we've just got kind of a standard template going here. So if we want to take a look at Kendrick Lamar's profile page here, take a look. There he is. There's Kendrick. And because I am Kendrick and I'm looking at Kendrick's profile, I can add a pet. Right now I just have one pet named King, and I follow 3 other pets. And if I like, I can go down, check out Beyonce's page, go to Lady LaSure's page, go all over. Killer Mike, me and Killer Mike are friends. I can't send a friend request to him because we're already friends. Yeah, so that's what's happening on our user profile. So speaking of sending friend requests, I think we might want to do that at some point. Let's find someone who I'm not friends with. I don't think he's friends with LP, as odd as that is. Friends with Killer Mike and not LP. So we're going to set that up in our next step here. Cool. So we're going to set up the ability to have a friend request. Now here, I'm not going to create another component for it. I don't really think there's a whole lot of a point in, taking someone to a form to send a friend request. We probably just want to fire that on a button click. So now, beyond just my one query up here, now I've got a mutation as well. And a friend request, it just takes 2 user IDs and sends back that status. It automatically, by default, will set that status to pending, and to actually get someone's friends back, that status has to be active. We don't have anything else in there right now to check, is a user blocked, or if they already sent a friend request, anything like that. This is very bare bones, just let's see if we're down to connect these 2 users. And so now, too, I've added one more thing here in the fetch policy, cache and network. So now I want it to update. When I fire this friend request, I want it to go check into the network. Cool. We made that request, it got inserted into the database, and so we're going to update to go from send a friend request in that button to a pending status for that friend request. Everything else, though, is pretty straightforward from there. Right here is our actual send request function. We just await a response, and then we set we just see that the friend request was sent, and we set the status to status. So if we send a friend request to LP, boom, there it is. Cool. Very basic level stuff there, but now we're actually binding a query and a mutation, and hopefully when LP logs in again, he'll want to be Kendrick Lamar's friend. We're going to go back to Kendrick's page before jumping into the next step, which at this point, all right, we've probably talked about users more than enough. We came here for the pets. That's what Petstagram's all about. So let's make a pet profile. And initially, the pet profile is going to be pretty similar to the user profile. I do have one extra thing happening. So I've got this state object for an image ID, URL, caption, and likes. So my user profile, I had this one profile image up top in the middle. I'm going to do the same thing with pets, but now when you see their other photos below, I want to be able to populate that top div with that picture that you clicked. So I just have one kind of extra state object here, and I'm also checking now that we do get those props and that we can set it in there on an initial page load. Later, we're going to do some extra stuff when we are actually liking a pet photo to make sure that we're just updating the likes from the database and not anything else beyond that. But yeah, if we go down here, the query is going to be very similar to the user profile query, where I'm just grabbing a pet and a ton of information that relates to that pet, just to be able to populate everything in on the component. So if we'll just look at Kendrick's dog, King. He only has one photo, given that side eye. 23 likes, though, so that's pretty good. Then we can look at other ones that do have other photos associated with them, like Uncle Johnny, who is owned by Killer Mike and LP. Yeah, we can go through and just see different photos that way. But right now, the pet profile is pretty basic. We're going to update that, though. We're going to get a little bit more going on there. Because we want to be able, well, I guess this isn't really pet profile. This is going to be adding a pet. So we'll go back to Kendrick's page because we want to actually do that. Going into the add pet form, this is going to be similar to our auth form where we've just got a state object that's bound to a lot of all of our inputs. And in here, we send the request, and our mutation just sends up those things and gets back a new ID. This time, though, once we add a new pet, we're going to go back into that user's profile. And so we want to make sure that's why we had the cache and network thing, to be able to, when we go back there, actually see that this new pet does belong to Kendrick Lamar. So we're going to go into the add pet form. What kind of pet should we add for Kendrick? Anyone have an opinion? Dog? Cat? Iguana? Yeah, we'll do iguana. That's cool. Let's see. Oh, man. Not a pet? It's going on Petstagram. It's a real pet. Starting to say that's the definitive truth on that. If it can go on Petstagram, it's a pet. So we'll do this iguana. We're just gonna. Sorry, what? Iguanagram? That's going to be a premium service. Microtransactions, if you want to add iguana. It's 99 cents. It's great. Dogs are always free. That's the nice thing about Petstagram. So we're going to say species. I put in my placeholder dog, cat, etc. So I'm going to just say lizard, and specifically an iguana. He's 10 years old. I don't know how old iguanas get. That sounds fine, though, right? And the image URL, we'll just use the image that we got before. So now when we go back to Kendrick's page after adding this pet, not only will we see his dog King, we'll see that it's updated to actually fetch the new pet as well, this iguana named Good Kid, after Kendrick's album Good Kid, Mad City. Boom, there it is. And Good Kid's just chilling there, and we can go into his profile, do all those things. He's just hanging out, the 10-year-old iguana. Fantastic. Cool. So yeah, now that we can add pets, really, we are going to go just into pet mode at this point. And so I actually don't want to look at Good Kid because I already follow Good Kid, so I'm going to jump ahead to, yeah, Beyonce's bird Nico. That sounds fantastic. Cool. So now we're going to be following a pet. So this is going to come from the pet profile. We're just adding one more query, one more mutation in here, similar to the friend request, where it just takes a pet ID and a follower ID, and I request to get those things back off of it, because unlike a friend request, I don't have a status for it. I have it set to just, if you want to follow someone, you can. So it's a little more similar to Twitter that way, though I guess we could set up a pet could block a user for some reason, so don't creep on the pets, guys. You'll get blocked. Not yet, though, because I haven't written it, so you're fine for now. But now, so I've added one more option here. So already we had the cache and network update here on our fetch policy. But here, now I know that anytime that I fire the follow pet mutation, I'm going to tell React Apollo that I want to refetch my pet profile query, because I want to be able to now update. This is just another way of potentially updating. Rather than waiting for next props, like we were doing before, now I'm just going to tell React Apollo to actually go and get the updated pet info specifically. And really, this is just to start illustrating that there's a lot of different ways that you could go about this within GraphQL and React Apollo. But this one's kind of nice to be able to explicitly state this query, I need it again, and grab it off of the URL one more time. So now, when I follow the pet, without a page refresh or whatever, I already follow Nico. Great. Done and done. That's it. Very, very straightforward there. I always like just going back to Kendrick's page for the next step. But yeah, that's all there is to it. It just sort of starts to build on itself, where you can pass more options and get a little more granular and everything. But overall, it's just about binding queries and mutations to a component. And remembering how to use the command line. That's also important. Git is cool. So now we're going to have the ability to add a pet image. And so within this, the big important thing that we'll look at in the code is that if I'm looking at, say, Nico, I shouldn't be able to add an image for Nico, because I don't own Nico as Kendrick Lamar. So I'm going to have to let's go to Good Kids page. I already have an image search set up for iguanas. We'll find another iguana image. But we'll look at the code on this one here. So being able to actually add a pet image, I've got a form here, another component that is going to look a lot like the components that we have elsewhere, but now, because we already have access to the ID, I'm just going to set refetch queries like that. I can set it as an array of strings, and if it doesn't need any more further information than that, I can just pass it as many queries as I might need to. And I want to for this so that when we go back to Good Kids page, because we'll do that after actually adding it, we'll redirect back there. We want to be able to see the new image that we're adding. So if we go in, let's just find another Yeah, this is great. I'm sure this is totally the same iguana, because they definitely don't look alike, but that's fine. Sweet. So we'll just do this in here, and we're just going to say, chillin' on the beach. Boom, and there he is, chilling on the beach, right there. Good old good kid. And so now at this point, we really only have one more step to be able to get this page kind of working as we would expect. Because right now, what the hell, man? I want to be able to like this photo. So we're just going to add one more thing to our pet profile, which is liking a pet image. And so now, if we go back into our pet profile, we now have the ability to like an image. It's just another mutation that sends up what that image ID is, and now I'm going to get back that image's ID and the likes on that, and so that I can actually specify, now I don't really need to tell it to refetch anything, because up here, since I've got the component will receive props, I'm going to just set the state that if I already have something set for the likes, that we've already rendered the page once, now just update this with the next updated likes, so that everything can stay in sync with it. And again, this is not necessarily like, oh, this is the best way to do it, as much as just, here's another way to do it. And so it's going to just sort of depend on your situation, how you want to update the data in your cache and in your server and on the component itself. But now, when we go in here, hooray, I can like it as many times as I like. I can make it seem like people really love Good Kid already. Oops, I must have clicked on the picture itself. I made it hard on myself. Really got to click on just the hand. And I can do it from down here too, and it updates both in tandem with one another. And yeah, that's about it. So that's just kind of some basic ways to start adding GraphQL into a front end and a few different use cases for it. Just really clean and simple. I mean, I could really break a lot of this stuff out even into further subcomponents, but for now, that seems to do the trick. So I'm going to go back into this mode and say, yeah, any questions? And I'll be nicer than, Lucille Bluth. Yes? Right. Yeah, so it's a fetch policy, so it's kind of those two things. Oh, yes, my note. So he was asking the cache and network thing with refetch queries, are they different ways to go about doing that, or are they kind of working together? And the answer is they sort of, yeah, like it looks at that fetch policy. So I could say update this query, say cache only, and it's just going to update with the information in the cache. Or I can say network only and say, just get me everything in there. For now, I want it to go into the network, look at what might be new, and only replace things in the cache. It'll make it slightly more performant that way. I mean, you are going to take a hit just in needing to access the network. So sometimes you're just going to want to keep things in the cache. Like for stuff on the splash page itself, I'm never going to need to refetch that query. I just want the last 6 things, and I just want to display those images. But if I want to get more granular, using those two together gives you a lot of options. But they are different, yeah, because the fetch policy just tells it how it's going to fetch that data, where it's going to fetch it from, whereas when you tell it specifically refetch this query, that's what's actually going to fire that. Yeah, so refetch queries, and then I also just did the component will receive props. Is that what it's called? Yeah, will receive props. And so that one is just saying, it's just listening for, did something change on this query? And so on initial page load, I just set everything to their profile image information. And for everything else, when it does get updated, now I'm just going to update likes. So that's another way of going about it. Yeah, no worries. Let me get back to my cool question mode. Actually, I probably shouldn't. We're probably going to switch around a lot, but that's fine. Yes, question. Mm-hmm. It should. So he's asking if you update it, or if you set a subscription, will Apollo update the cache with the subscription? And I'll say I'm pretty sure you can set it to do that. I haven't really messed around with setting it as a subscription that way, but you should be able to, because you can set up React Apollo to be listening for changes that way and specifically. And so if you want to be able to pass that in as an option, potentially, I don't see why you couldn't. I couldn't go into the specifics of how to implement that just because I haven't played around with it myself. But yeah. Yes?
Do you have
Yeah, Daria just asked if the code is available for this. It is. It's on my GitHub, which is just github.com/IsaacMillerCodes. If you find this repo, I think it's just called Petstagram Frontend. So it is set up with these different branches. If you go to the master branch, you're getting create React app. So have fun with that. But yeah, you can step through and kind of see how it grows from there. And the back end is there as well. Same sort of thing where it goes through 10 steps. So even if you were here in part 1 and wanted to see like how I set up auth or like following a pet, because I didn't cover those in part 1 of the talk, you can see that there as well. I should probably pin those repos. Yes? Totally. So I think the big advantage of doing it is this idea that so Firebase is going to work like a lot of databases do, where I'm going to make a query for one specific type of data, but actually going into different types, different models. Like GraphQL can actually be set up to hit different servers if you want it to. It just needs to be told where that data lives and how to grab it. So I think the big advantage is that one request, one response to get everything done. And then also the other big advantage of using this over something like Firebase or even just standard like RESTful backend is that ability to have the flexibility to use different databases, different servers. If you have a cacophony of things going on, you can still have GraphQL kind of tame that whole system. Yeah.
So just real quick, that GQL method, you were actually calling it without the parentheses, is that right?
Yeah, it actually, you can just straight up put a template literal with it and it interprets it. Yeah. I'll need to look under the hood, but I'm pretty sure it just calls the method straight up. It's just a shorthand syntax that they let you do. Yeah. Okay, I'll put parentheses on it. Yeah. Next time. I think back here first, then yeah.
So, like Relay has a standard form for the schema for like doing pagination and things like that. Can you talk to that type of schema with Apollo client?
There are a lot of different like ways to set that up. I didn't show like pagination stuff in here, but there are a lot of different little helper methods and even like things that you can just bring in as like say objects, schemas and stuff from React Apollo to do that sort of thing. The docs are actually really well written and pretty extensive. So it depends on what specifically you're trying to do. But like in that example case of like, can I do pagination? Is there something set up for React Apollo to do that? There definitely is. Yeah. Sorry, up front first, then yes.
I want to respond to the question about why we do this.
Okay, yeah, I'll try to repeat. So we're gonna get a tag, as they call it in the comedy world, on why you would choose GraphQL over something else.
One of the advantages of GraphQL is you have the schema that defines what the data looks like when you run it in the backend. You usually don't have to make different versions of your API, you just add stuff in it. Everything's good. But I think a big thing is each field can have its own resolver that you make up. And so if you need to do some schema portion, which you usually do, there's nothing else for dates. Object IDs, MongoDB object IDs versus string versions of object IDs, how screwed up that can get. You build that all into resolvers and kind of all just works.
Yeah, so what he's saying there as far as another great advantage with it is that you do on the back end, you have this schema set up with different ways to resolve on different properties of a certain type. And so that gives you a lot of ability. He was mentioning stuff like in Mongo, where you might have a string ID versus an int ID, and it can get really convoluted very quickly. Whereas if we just look in the back end here on what our pet type is, sure, there's some stuff that already exists in the table natively, like ID, name, species, etc. But then I also have these resolver functions off of it so that I can go grab any given pet's owners, followers. I even have this one that is just like, I just want the total followers. I'm lazy. I don't even want to call followers.length. And so I have a resolver for that. As much as real world, that might be a performance hit. You might not want to do that. But you can get that level with it where you tell it any sort of property that might relate to this type that you want to get. And as long as it's got a resolver and a way to go access that data, and it knows what type it's going to return from that, then you're more than welcome to do that. And in here, I just defined that, oh, okay, I want an array of images. It's going to be an array of image types. It's a GraphQL list. And so I don't need to go into anything beyond that here because I have an image type defined elsewhere, and it knows how to resolve everything on each image type that I call for. Yeah. You know, honestly, Falcor's like on my list to like check out, but I couldn't speak to it because I haven't messed with it. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, the question was like basically comparing this to Falcor, and I personally don't have a lot, but luckily the gentleman in the back said that essentially you can just get more. It sounds like just more in depth and more kind of granular with things in GraphQL than in Falcor. Between the two. But it solves the similar sort of problem of cutting down on request response cycles and being able to access all your data at once. Yes, yes.
You mentioned about the resolve. Correct me if I'm wrong. Why would you use this version of that rather than actually going into a command version? Not saying that you mean using like your schema there. Like if you use string represent strings like mongoose itself, using like mongoose or something. Doing it GraphQL itself.
Oh yeah, I mean, so why you would use this instead of using like Mongoose or things within Mongo itself, that sort of idea. I mean, when I was first picking up GraphQL, I was using a Mongo database with Mongoose as the way that I was fetching my data. In this backend, I'm using Connects with a Postgres database, but like it really the nice thing about this, why you would define your schema here instead of maybe up there, is that like really the ultimate nice thing about it, especially for like new people on your team, beyond the fact that it can keep in sync with your front end and keeps everything in one place. You do here, GraphQL has built in a dev tool called GraphQL that is self-documenting. And so the really nice thing with that is that if I know nothing about our server, I'm a brand new employee, just got my dev environment set up, I'm like, okay, so we have queries. What's in my queries? Oh, I can query users, a single user, pets, blah, blah, blah. All right, well, what's on a pet? Cool, a pet has all these fields to it. And then followers, that's a user, so it's got all these fields to it. And so that sort of self-documenting thing, as much as you could define it in Mongo, then you're just kind of adding that step of like, oh, go check the schema inside of Mongo, whereas here it's just, it all lives right here. And it updates with your server as you, add different types or add different, resolvers, stuff like that. Yes? Sure. So he's talking about using like Alchemy, or is it Alchemist or Alchemy? Is it Optimistic UI? Okay, got it. Yeah, and that shows. Like I've not really messed around with that much. I mean, like at the end of the day, where it's nice with React Apollo to have all these different ways of updating and set stuff up, but then you could bring in something like Optimistic UI and get even more granular as far as how you want to do it. Because you're right. Like if I'm here and the server's in Australia, there's no way to like say that it's just going to be zero latency. Like there's a lot there. And so you want to just be smart about what components really need updated, fresh data. Like here, I was kind of splatting stuff out of like, here's how you can update stuff. You really wouldn't need to update stuff that much. Like I could go into the store when I like a pet image and just update the store's value and this value without ever making a request to the server. I don't actually like really need to do that, but just showing different methods that way. And so I think the big thing is that you're still, the GraphQL by itself with nothing else, its big takeaway is that one request, one response sort of thing. But if you bring in something like Optimistic UI, yeah, I think that you could get even more fine-tuned with it. But React Apollo does have a fair amount of things in and of itself as far as just looking at the store or specifically refreshing everything from the network. You just want to be smart about what makes sense for your page or for that component. Yeah. Cool. Is that it? Sweet. I have one more GIF. And then we're done. Yay. I had to get RuPaul in there. That's it. That's it. She just says thank you. I was going to say good luck and don't fuck it up, but that's a different RuPaul GIF.